Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name is Erica Harper. I'm head of PK-12 initiatives here at the Phillips Collection. And to begin, I just want to acknowledge that the Phillips Collection is situated upon the ancestral and unceded lands of the Piscataway people, and we would like to pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. This living land acknowledgement reminds us of the significance of place, the continued existence of Indigenous and other peoples, and the museum's commitment to building respectful relationships with those who call these lands home today. And now we're going to hear from our director, Dorothy Kaczynski, for our purpose of the day.
Hello, everybody. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's panel conversation held on the momentous occasion of the special exhibition, Jacob Lawrence, The American Struggle. We're thrilled to be presenting this show as a centerpiece of our 100th anniversary celebration. And we're grateful to all of the lenders who made the reunion of the panels possible, notably Harvey Ross, a dedicated Phillips trustee who owns half or 15 panels from the series. Harvey's generosity of spirit and commitment to the critical examination and study of the reunited series has been an inspiration to all of us. The Phillips enjoyed a long and cherished relationship with Jacob Lawrence during his lifetime, and his Migration series has been a cornerstone of our collection since it was acquired. Half of the series was acquired in 1942. As a teaching artist who had a distinguished career as a professor of art at the University of Washington, Lawrence understood the power of visual storytelling to foster empathy and greater understanding of our shared humanity. Lawrence also understood the importance of timing. He painted his radically integrated view of American history at the start of the modern civil rights movement. It continues to resonate today, more than a half century later, a timely moment to re-examine our past through Lawrence's integrated view of history in scenes that shine a light on the contributions of all people, including women, African Americans, Indigenous people, and immigrants to our nation's fabric. Teaching with Jacob Lawrence's Migration series has been at the heart of our educational program for decades. Our award-winning cross-disciplinary curriculum has inspired generations of students and teachers and led to amazing collaborations across the city, the nation, and the world. Our talented educational team has enjoyed the opportunity to expand and deepen their teaching practice this summer through close looking at Lawrence's Struggle series. Just as Lawrence interpreted pivotal moments from American history through education programming, we have continued the dialogue started by Lawrence over 60 years ago about the continued struggle to create a more just American society. In our conversation today with our four presenters, we will explore innovative strategies for integrating Lawrence's Struggle series into classroom curriculum across disciplines. We hope this exchange of ideas is just the start of much more to come. And I now turn it back to Erica Harper, our head of PK-12 initiatives, who will be moderating the conversation. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, DK, for that introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So I am so happy to be here with you all this afternoon, talking about one of my favorite artists to talk about and to work with students in the gallery, and that is Jacob Lawrence. So we're going to do something a little different to introduce our panel today, and thank them for playing along with me. So instead of reading their formal bios, because that would take us a very long time, we're going to drop a link in the chat and you can read that for yourself about all of their awards and all the awesome things that they've done up to this point. And I asked them to send me some personal things about themselves to open us up this evening. And so we're going to hear from them. So first we have Elgin Cleckley, who is Assistant Professor of Architecture and Design Thinking at the University of Virginia. Elgin is committed to helping students grow and become their true selves. He's fascinated by trees, the tulip tree in particular. He wants to create a garden like Ann Spencer's and a writing shed as well. He often imagines what a world in the color palette of Lawrence's migration series would look like. And he is in constant amazement of how we shape the built environment over time. Welcome, Elgin. We also have Cosby Hunt. Cosby Hunt is a history teacher at Thurgood Marshall Academy Public Charter School, and also is the senior manager for social studies at the Center for Inspired Teaching. Cosby has lived in 5 places in his life and all but 8 of his years in DC. He is part of 4 friends from elementary school who get together every year. His full name, I did not know this, is Isaac Cosby Hunt III, but instead of calling him Trey, 3 times dope, or little Ike, everyone except the government calls him by his middle name. He has 2 boys and he is an only child. Welcome, Cosby. We also have Fred Joyner, poet and curator. Carbs are Fred's nemesis. The phrase all blues describes as much about his taste in music as it does in colors. He has vivid dreams about running a bed and breakfast / farm / art retreat. His favorite meal to cook is brown sugar cayenne, slow roasted chicken and rosemary roasted potatoes. And contrary to the popular belief, he believes that poetry, poems, and a poetic lens can solve almost any problem. Welcome, Fred. And finally, we have Tess Korobkin, who is assistant professor for American art and art history and archaeology at the University of Maryland. Tess is an educator fascinated by the art and the history of the United States. She's a believer that encounters with art can be transformative, and she is a tired and enchanted mama of 2 toddlers. Welcome, Tess. So now that we have, I guess I should tell y'all something personal about me. I'll give you just one about myself, right? I guess that's only fair since I put y'all on the spot. I've lived in DC for 16 years, but Memphis, Tennessee is where my heart is. That is home for me. And I don't eat barbecue in DC because why when I'm from Memphis? So on to our topic of the evening, and that is the struggle series in Jacob Lawrence. And so what we're going to do to start off is each of our presenters today is going to jump right in and we're going to do a little teaching. And so each of them has a little presentation that they're going to do, and would love for you all to be active in the chat, sort of participating and answering questions with them as well. We're going to, instead of talking about teaching, we're just going to teach today. And then we're going to follow up with some more questions and dive a little deeper. But to start, I just wanted to warm us up into talking about the struggle series. And so everyone here, feel free to also put your responses in the chat. And so from my panel, and any one of you can start who wants to jump in, I would love for you to share about a panel or panels that have resonated the most with you since you've been researching and working with the struggle series.
Erica, can you pull up panel 7?
I sure can. I'm going to share my screen. One second. There we go.
You know, one of the things that I love about the struggle series is the physicality of it. And there are a lot of pointy objects in the struggle series. Man, there are a lot of bayonets, a lot of rifles, a lot of sticks and stones. And I'm actually, and so there's that in this image. But I'm actually drawn especially to the Thomas Paine quote. And when I read about the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot here, shrinking from service, I look at this guy on the right and he's got his hand bundled because he's probably got frostbite and his head is bowed. And it's just, again, it's great physicality. And then if you're looking closely on the left, you see the blood-stained cloak of the other soldier. So it was hard to pick my favorite, but between the visual and the quote, that kind of sold me on 7.
Thank you, Cosby. And we're definitely going to talk a lot about those visuals and those quotes, because I think that's so central to what Lawrence is doing with the struggle series.
I'm happy to go next.
Thank you, Tess.
If you pull up panel 26,
Absolutely.
So it is hard to choose a panel, but this one, I felt like really revealed its riches the longer I looked at it. So the way that the earth here just encircles this bed of flowers really made me think about the quality of peace here, which has this, both this kind of hopeful flourishing, but also almost a grave site, right? Like a burial, the earth that's been carved out. And so that sense of mourning and melancholy that might go along with peace. And just the way that Lawrence is always able to get the complexities, those kind of paradoxical tensions in the kinds of human experiences that he's expressing.
Thank you, Tess.
I'm gonna jump in because that you can keep that one up.
Okay.
Because I in a way I'm bridging what Cosby just said and what Tess is saying has just said to us, is that one of the things that jumped out to me is because this one is of the natural world. There are no weapons in it, or at least no weapons that we know of. Like if we were in certain traditions, some of those plants might be weapons, but if you know how to use them. But that's one thing that just jumped out at me immediately. And then as I started working on the piece was that on this project, that really jumped out at me, is that there is jaggedness in it, but they're not rendered as bayonets or guns or swords or whatever. And I just, that's something that really, and then, you know, peace. I mean, that was just like, I don't know how else to describe it. It was just a super kind of like calming thing that started to happen when I looked at that piece and at this panel. So.
Thank you, Fred.
Panel 18.
All
If you don't
right.
mind, Erica, thank you.
Oh, yes. Love this one.
Yeah, I was taking a walk this morning where there used to be a Lewis and Clark statue here in Charlottesville. And in it, Sacagawea is huddled behind Lewis and Clark, kind of ducking out to the side. And I was standing there thinking about this event and wondering, you know, this might be the template for what we think about could go in its place, because it tells an honest story, it tells a truthful story, but there's something so powerful about the use of perspective and depth that you get in it. Also, there's that beautiful moment of recognition in it that's really magical, and it just feels like a way to really rethink how we're looking at our public spaces here in Charlottesville.
I love that. Thank you, Elgin. And also, when I talk to students about this panel in particular, I've drawn their attention to her braid. And I think I probably picked this up from the catalog, which is awesome. But sort of that frazzle braid, right? Sort of, and her in between, sort of Lewis and Clark on her left, and then, you know, her people, her father, and probably uncles on the right. And sort of, what is Lawrence telling us? It's not a pretty braid. It's not neat. He could have painted it that way, but he didn't. And is he? And I think obviously, yes, trying to tell us something about what is to come of the relationships between those two groups. And he does this like all over in the Struggle series, right? Over and over again, he's telling us so much. Just by the visual cues that he leaves us. So before I get too deep in my soapbox and everything, we're going to jump into, thank you all for sharing those. And then in the chat, please feel free, if you all have a panel that's been resonating with you, please share, we love to hear. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we are going to we're going to move into our teaching portion. And so we're going to start with Elgin. And he's going to do his thing. I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you so much to the Phillips for this great event. I'm going to share my screen. If you don't mind giving me that universal now known symbol of I can see it, that would be great. The thumbs up, right? Fantastic. So I have an idea, one that we can all be a part of, a journey we can all take together. So right now we're looking at each other in this way that now seems normal, that once wasn't. Consider your Zoom box as a portal through space, time, and place. A portal that helps us discover, decipher, and understand our story, our narrative. So if I could ask fellow time travelers that you please close your eyes. Thank you all for closing your eyes. Now that your eyes are closed, let's forget our worries, our thoughts. Did I leave that on? Should I have said that yesterday? Imagine your Zoom name shifting into numbers. Those numbers are years, moving backwards. As they scroll, notice the temperature of your space. Is it hot? Is it cold? Feel the effects on your skin, your face. Recall the weather this week. Hey, when's the last time you got bit by a bug? Sink into your chair if you're sitting. Feel the heaviness of your feet if you're standing. As you sink, you're rooted into an imaginary space, one that many have walked before. As you sink, you'll also feel like you're floating and can see this imaginary world around you, also from above. Duck, a bird just flew by. Mist, now we in a cloud. Feel the wind at your back, also cutting from the front. Each breath inhales miles, kilometers, distance, and time. It's all coming clear. We pull into a harbor. With your eyes still closed, you see it coming into view. Layers, compression, past, present, future. We hear y'all. Let's open your eyes. Feels familiar, parts of it, right? Look, the World Trade Center. Blank, Mannahatta, Hilly Island. Fruits, nuts, birds, animals, abundance. To the left of us, migrant birds. Seals, whales, dolphins, estuary, and glory. What year is this? A New York City water taxi jets by us. A helicopter heads toward the East River waterfront. 6 jet skiers. Further on the right, a ship. Cargo, human, darkened skin. Somehow you feel the distance it traveled as it moves toward Pearl and Water Street. A Verizon store. No, wait. It's New York's municipal slave market under a triangular wood enclosure. That coastline looks much higher back under the FDR. Lenape families, bark-covered dome-shaped houses, hunting, fishing, JP Morgan building. We turn and we head up the Chattahoochee, the river that runs both ways. We turn, we head up the Hudson, West Side Highway, traffic buzzing along both ways. Wait, are we in a ship? What language is that? Dutch, Queen's English, Lenape trading in villages along banks, city bikes. Are we here to fight or in a pandemic release sightseeing cruise? Back up, too close to me. Too late to think further. Suddenly we paddle, sails, the wind, the motor hurtles us up north. Space and time, blurs of green as we ascend. We pass Newburgh, Kingston, start to slow down just outside of Albany, just north of Troy. Mohawk River Valley, Mohawk ancestral homeland, a gap in the Appalachians. Who was here? We are here. Your years, your Zoom counter, 1817 to 1825, 363 miles. When was your last trip? Was it from Albany to Buffalo? Before us, the greatest engineering feat of its time. Thank you, Jesse Hawley. Crossing fields, forests, rocky cliffs. 83 locks, Clinton, Wright, Geddes, White, Roberts. For 8 years of wet, heat, and cold, they felled trees and excavated, mostly by hand and animal power, mile after mile. They devised equipment to uproot trees and pull stumps and develop hydraulic cement that hardened underwater. With hand drills and black powder, they blasted rocks. Accelerated dispossession, removal, Cayugas, Shenango, Seneca Nation, Oneida. Slaves, exodus, free blacks, Irish local farmers. Timber, minerals, fur, and fertile land. Americans, monument, memorial, canal. Highway, change the song, change lanes, 4 feet deep, 40 feet wide. Now your Zoom name says panel 26, 1956, in parentheses from the history of the American people. Not far from Brown versus Board of Education, before the Freedom Rides, massively resisting here in Virginia. Through Lawrence's lens, sheer human capital and labor, sweat equity. A few frames from the thousands together. Imagine wading through swamps, coughing from the soot of smoke pots around your neck to ward off mosquitoes. What would a day be in the frame of this portal? What are your thoughts and emotions that arise looking at the builders? What do you feel? If you're comfortable just to give a feedback there or use the chat, please do. Good stretching and weight, thank you. Are those babies? Point. Tired, a sense of heaviness, exactly. You must feel that straining underneath the beam. Exactly, thank you, Fred. The beam like a deep mouth, point. Weight. Exactly. So imagine how tight it would be in that space. Thank you all for those. Exactly. Strangely also hope. Great place to go into. Lastly here, your Zoom name, numbers rolling back from 1956 to 2021. Eyes fully open. How does the builders connect with our current day? What are the larger questions the builders provokes in our current lived experience? What does it tell us about where we are now? How does the work shift how we see each other? How do we build, operate, and maintain? Are our collective spaces of learning and sharing the platforms for change? Lawrence is here, was here, will be here for us to develop courses of action in our story, our narrative, our struggle. Thank you.
That was so great. I'm just going to ask you a couple quick questions and we'll get deeper into what you did a little bit. But I'm just curious to hear, could you tell me a little bit about, well, one, Elgin, who was your audience that you were thinking about as you were doing your activity? And then also just what was the process like for you as you were putting this together? And just heads up to everyone else, those are going to be my questions for you too.
No worries. My audience, I was thinking very inclusively. A lot of my background is in architecture and also exhibition design. So you think about everyone in a real inclusive sense. The images you saw at the beginning were from a current design research studio I'm teaching here at the University of Virginia. It's based on actually a site where we're looking at our history. And so we've been actually following the model of how Lawrence looked at history, this idea of collection of research, and also thinking about this way too of how you can respond. And so there's a real powerful kind of connection between that and then also kind of thinking about how to put this idea together for this presentation.
Awesome, thank you. And we're gonna get into, I'm gonna talk to you a little bit more a little later about these ideas of public spaces, because I know you have some thoughts about that. So next up, we're gonna have Cosby.
Happy Saturday, everyone. All right, let's see here. So let me first give a little background. 2 years ago, I was starting to teach at a new school, Thurgood Marshall Academy, and teaching AP US history for the first time in about 10 years after spending 10 years of doing professional development for teachers. So there was a whole lot of stuff happening, new stuff for me. And then I get this email, this invitation to to myself and my students to be in a book about Jacob Lawrence's struggle series. And, you know, I'm still trying to like prepare my lesson plans for the year. But of course you can't say no to an opportunity to be in a book about that will go with a traveling exhibit. Now, I'm very well familiar with Lawrence's migration series. I actually did not know anything about the struggle series till I got this email. And so then I had to figure out, how am I going to marry this great opportunity with the actual curriculum that I'm supposed to be teaching as an AP US history student. And we were, at the time, we were reading a book called Chains by Laurie Haltz Anderson about a young enslaved girl's experiences during the American Revolution. So I said, okay, well, we're gonna let the students do some creative writing. And we're gonna find a way to connect Lawrence's struggle series with what we're studying with the American Revolution. And so I said, well, gosh, let me, you know, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna do this? Let's make sure that the students try to incorporate some of the things that we're going to encounter in this unit, like every chapter of Chains starts with a primary source quote from the revolutionary period. I said, we got to make use of that. And I figured, okay, look, I know the Declaration of Independence is going to be part of the curriculum, and there are a lot of powerful words there. So let's try to incorporate that somehow into what they're going to do. And so, and also, and by the way, the Peabody Essex Museum was kind of kicking off this initiative, and then it would end, they were saving the best for last. The struggle series would end up at the Phillips collection, but it started with the Peabody. But they had a number of, they had some information that they included with the work. So I said, okay, you got to connect what you're writing to what the Peabody is telling us about the paintings. And then, of course, I said, well, let's let the young people connect it to what they see in their world. So make a clear connection between the historical event portrayed in the painting and one current struggle for equality in the United States. And I kind of just said, okay, students, you're gonna pick a panel and you're gonna write about it. And here's a rubric, and let's just see what happens. And Erica, can you go to panel 27? Let me stop sharing. Actually, you know what? I can do it from mine. I can do it from mine. Let's see here. There we go. So there's panel 27. For freedom we want and will have, for we have served this cruel land long enough. And you can see, of course, some pointy objects and some physicality in this one as well. And so I want to share with you the poem that one of my students created as she looked at this work. And you will notice that she ignores some of the stuff in my rubric. How dare she? But she ignores some of the stuff in the rubric. And so then I'm confronted with, well, is she going to get a bad grade because she didn't follow the rubric that I hastily put together? And of course, the answer is no to that. But all right, let's take a look. All we do is fight. We fight for our lives. We fight for our rights. We fight for change because we are tired of things staying the same. Nat Turner was fed up with the ways Blacks were being treated. He fought and killed the slave masters until at last he was defeated. They were scared of a man with a pen. They act like David Walker's words were a sin. He was just a man using his words as a way to enlighten. They were so scared that they became frightened. David Walker taught the Blacks to keep their heads up and fight, but they tried to keep his words out of sight. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. She talks about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, Claudette Colvin. We fought for the right to vote. We fought so that people wouldn't take our marches as a joke. You would think by the 2000s, things would change. Blacks had new rights, but still had to fight. What an outrage. We are suffering from gun violence, but we know we can't stay silent. We shout, Black Lives Matter, because that shows we are fighters. We fight to be heard and not just seen. We fight for all to know we are human beings. Saudia is a freshman in college right now. At the time that she wrote this, she was in 11th grade, and then by the time it appeared in the book, she was in 12th grade, and she's a special young lady. And it's a good reminder, of course, for those of you who were paying attention before to the rubric, there's nothing about the Declaration of Independence in there. And like I said, you know, sometimes the students do something and you've got a quality product and you sort of have to throw the rubric out the window. I'm sure that I encouraged her to include something from the Declaration of Independence or a quote from Chains, but this is the version of the poem that ended up in the book that you can get at the gift shop anytime the Struggle series appears in the museum on this tour. And I was very pleased with how it turned out.
Thank you, Cosby. Quick question for you. Do you feel like your students had a hard time sort of being able to relate to the Struggle series? I know we just saw Saudia, she had sort of that direct link to the 2000s and sort of mentioned contemporary activists. How were the students relating to Struggle series generally when they did that writing project?
Well, it's interesting. I thought that so many of them would be drawn to that particular panel because all of my students are Black and brown, and that is one of relatively few panels with explicitly African Americans in it. But it really covered the gamut in terms of what they chose to write about. One of the other powerful pieces was about the Battle of New Orleans panel. So I will just say that I was surprised by the diversity of what they chose, and pleased by that. And I think because they were in an AP US history class where so much time was spent with Mr. Hunt, and PowerPoints and note-taking and the textbook, when they had a chance to write creatively and write in response to an artist, they just grabbed that opportunity because it was different than what so much of the year was. And they really glommed onto that opportunity. And I think there's a part of your question that I didn't answer.
No, that was perfect. Thank you, Cosby.
Thank you.
So next up, we'll have Fred.
All right. Thank you so much to the Phillips, to Elsa and Erica for doing this and for inviting me. And then an immediate thanks to Cosby, because so like, I didn't play basketball coming up, but like, if I did, what you just did was the alley-oop to me. Like, you couldn't have set it up any better. And even though I'm only 5'7", I'm gonna try to get the ball a little closer to the basket, and Tess will just come and just, you know, reverse dunk it. So, I'm gonna share my screen in a second here. Let's see if I can. All right, yes, here we go. So bear with me. Okay, now I gotta get my, sorry about this. I should be better.
You think?
Okay.
Few months into a pandemic, we'll all be better, but we're not.
I know. So do you see, can everyone see that? Send me a thumbs up. Okay. So yeah, the poetic possibility in the struggle series, Jacob Lawrence, by Jacob Lawrence, an ekphrastic approach. What Cosby just articulated is what us poet geek people call ekphrastic poetry or ekphrasis. It's when you take a work of art, in most discussions, it's a piece of visual art and some writing that responds to that. And so what I'm gonna do is go through. I just wanted to say a few things and then we could go ahead because I'm a word person. This catalog, the way this catalog is assembled is for creative writing, just is such a awesome piece for teaching. And it starts with poetry. The lyric essay, the short lyric essay that Barbara Earl Thomas wrote, the Langston Hughes opener, I Too Sing America, and the Whitman epigraph that Dr. Turner opens with. These are all kind of like pieces that really continue to infuse the poetic ethos into the discussion. And I don't know whether the designers of the book did this or whether you all did this, but even the inscriptions have a kind of use the page, have a certain kind of poetic deployment. They use line breaks, dashes, ellipses, and all M dashes, and all kinds of other punctuation that is really a solid gesture towards the poetic rendering. And so what I thought is, let's try to write some poems, right? So here's a little advice on writing poems, strategies to enter or exit the world of the painting using poetry. Obviously it's a painting, right? Talk about the colors, the setting, anything that is the world of the painting. Some people may not be familiar with the history. So let's talk about the colors. How do the colors make you feel, right? And like, you know, there's so many things that we can kind of like, we can glean just from looking at it. You know, I talked about blue. Anytime I see the color blue, like my eyes perk up, right? So I'm immediately drawn to something that has blue. Start small. You know, in thinking about this exercise, I was trying to think of something that could cross the age barriers. You know, from say middle school to definitely to high school, and then kind of like college and graduate workshop writing settings. These kinds of exercises can work. So you can start with a haiku, a fairly low bar to entry. Haiku usually engage the natural world, and senryu engage humanity and thoughts about humanity. The loku, which is Amir Baraka's formation and a response to the haiku. It's usually a satirical piece. It has no syllabic structure, but you have to make it swing just because Baraka's jazz aesthetic. Like it has to have movement in it, right? The tanka, which is also another Japanese form of poetry, which gives you a little bit more space. It's 5 lines, and then the haibun, which is for those writers who are more prone to prose or who have a hard time distilling their language. Try a haibun, which is a block of prose, and then a haiku, and then you can kind of chain them together. So this is something that you can use to kind of like, these are all techniques that you can use. Personify, right? That's another strategy. Look at it like we talked about all the pointy objects in the pictures. Well, you know, Nas, the rapper Nas, wrote this song called "I Gave You Power." It was on I think it was like on his second album, and he gave voice to a gun, right? To the gun of a young child who was of a child who was about to avenge a death, right? of one of his compatriots. And so the whole rap song, the whole poem is the gun speaking, right? So how can we look at the images in the American Struggle series and personify things? Like, I would be really interested in looking at like the panel that Tess and I really resonated with, the piece one. Like, what is the soil saying, right? What are the flowers saying? What are the elements in that piece saying? So there's multiple ways for a young poet or a not so young but hesitant poet to enter the work. And then what I'm calling remix, erasure, collage, right? Remixing, taking language that's already in the piece, take language that's already there and try to repurpose it to say something that is missing, or to say something to, a lot of work. The thing that I appreciate about Lawrence's work is these inscriptions are the ellipses, right? These are silences that say something about where possibility, that say something about possibility. Well, let's write into that possibility. Let's use the words in the inscription or in a piece of criticism about the work to remix and enter the space, right? Erasure or blackout poetry is another technique. So, there's been quite a movement. There's a lot of writers right now doing this as a strategy, a generative strategy to work, is you take a text and then you black out things, you redact things to give an alternative meaning, or to say something else, or to distill. One good example is this book right here. This is A Mutiny of Mourning. It's a poet and artist named Nikisha Breeze. She used Conrad's Heart of Darkness to create these pieces in poetry that are supposed to be the voices of the ancestors that Conrad is talking about in his work. And then another work is Sasha Banks, America Mine. You got to get that book. If you can find that book, go ahead and get that, because she's got these, she blurs the line between remix, erasure, and collage, because she's got these onion pages where you can see the words on the back that through the page. And so it makes another kind of poem as you flip through the page. And then collage. Collage is interesting because you could take disparate elements and cut them up, and you could take text like, so for instance, I'd be interested to see what a collage poem would look like with the Declaration of Independence and Frederick Douglass's address, "What to the slave is the 4th of July," right? Different kinds of language, different questions being asked. So how could we make a piece of writing or a piece of art that is saying something about that? So really quickly, I wrote some little sample haiku here to try to articulate, like write into what I was articulating here, or trying to articulate. So this is one of the pieces that resonated with me, because I think of this a poem or the vernacular, the black buck or the bull, right? And so I wrote this little haiku here, and I called it vernacular. Buck or bull, only the tree, the blood, the white, winter, and soil know which. So, just really quickly, and we could talk about this later. I'm going to move to my examples. So here's another little piece I wrote. And forgive the kind of like stridency or whatever. Like I was just trying to clearly articulate what I was saying here. So this is after this piece here. First of all, I think the text that accompanies this piece is a poem in and of itself. It renders itself on the page as an intentional construction. So this is not to take away from that, but this is to just maybe provide another way in. Outside the body, blood is still blood. a savage thirst, a trail of tears. So this piece, that little piece in particular, because this is Andrew Jackson, we can't not talk about the Trail of Tears. Like, I'm not gonna let him off the hook, right? Like, so we have to incorporate that in, and it's a way of extending how we teach about this piece, because it's like, okay, well, you saw all your men die here. You would think you would lose your thirst for blood, right? So it's just something that we kind of like want to introduce in as teachers and educators. These are things that we can infuse in to kind of like deepen and peel back the layers of the discussion, especially if we're talking about American history. Like, it's messy, right? We got to do that. So so this piece right here is like, this piece was shouting at me because of not only because of the piece itself, but because of the text. If we fail, let us fail like men and expire together in one common struggle. I immediately went to this. If We Must Die by Claude McKay, right? The sentiment that Lawrence had in this is the exact same sentiment that is in this poem, right? 1919, Claude McKay writes this, he writes it before that, but it's published in 1919 in The Liberator. And it is impossible. Now, I'm speculating here, so all you historians don't like jump on me, but I think that it is impossible, being that Jacob Lawrence started his work on this series in the literature and rare publications division, that he did not come across this poem and that did not inform this, right? Because Jacob Lawrence told us in the text in the book, he told us all my ideas. This is the McCarthy era, right? He can't say what he wants to say. The ideas are in the work. Check out the work. And so in the work, he's saying, if we must die, let it not be like hogs, right? I'm saying this in this day, and this is akin to the same thing that these people, that Henry Clay was saying, and that these people were fighting for. This is what I'm saying today. And I'm really interested in this last line of Claude McKay's poem, Pressed to the Wall, Dying, but Fighting Back. Because in the introduction to this catalog, this is why the catalog is such a beautiful teaching piece. The first paragraph of this catalog had a piece in there when it was talking about when Lawrence was addressing all his audience. He said Garveyites, communists, and he had this whole list. Garveyites interested me in particular because fighting back is not always dying. Sometimes fighting back is leaving. Sometimes that's how we get all the maroonage, right? That's how we get all of the maroonage in the Great Dismal Swamp, the maroonage in the Appalachian Mountains, the maroonage into Nova Scotia, right? So we can't ignore this. These are things that I think we can, when we use poems like this that are written at a different time, we can infuse and ask these questions of the work, and ask these questions of the artist, and ask the questions of the world. So the last thing I want to say is, even in its incompleteness, like I think we were told in the catalog that this was supposed to be 60 panels. This just speaks to the genius of Lawrence. Even in its incompleteness, it's an apt metaphor, right? For the incompleteness of this experiment that America is, and trying to attempting to still make a country out of what it is that we have, right? So what it is we've been given, these pieces that we've been given. And so my last slide real quick is thank you. And I wrote a little haiku that kind of like went along with this. I tried to accompany this panel or think about it in a different way, and perhaps in the same way. Even after wars, blood, fire, and tears, the soil knows how to heal. Thank you very much.
I just have to say very quickly that I was driving to work on Wednesday. And those of you who are in the Washington area know of a station called WPFW. And the DJ that morning started talking about Claude McKay, and apparently Wednesday was his birthday, and he read, the DJ read "If We Must Die" on the radio on my way to school. So clearly this was meant to be. Fred, you and I are definitely playing on the same team. Alley-oop to you anytime, brother.
Thank you, bro. Thank you all.
That was awesome. Thank you, Fred. I just want to point out, so we do, Beth Turner is in the room today, and she wrote in the chat, just in case you missed it, Fred, that Lawrence actually had a personally inscribed copy of this Claude McKay and often quoted this poem. So I think, right, we didn't even make a big assumption there. Thanks for letting us know that, Beth. And Fred came to see me. Fred and I took a class together at another museum, a little 10-week course. And that's where we met each other. And he came to see me at the Phillips. We walked through struggle and talked about a lot of this for a whole lot longer. And I think it's great the way you put this all together, Fred. I'm going to follow back, because another thing that came to mind is what I love what you did with peace. And I was watching Elgin to see if his face would light up, because when I talked to Elgin on the phone, Elgin, you're nodding. So I think you know why I thought about you. Will you tell everybody why I thought about you when I saw that?
Oh, no, I didn't. I was just my neck problem. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead and share it, Erica.
Yeah, so
It's
in
called
my
my middle-aged
conversation with
father.
Elgin, he was telling me something that I thought was just the craziest. And he lives sort of right near Monticello, right, Elgin? And he was joking with me. It's like, I could throw any kind of seeds in my backyard and it will grow. Like, I don't have to do anything to it, right? Why? What do we know about Monticello? Duh, plantation. And so as soon as I read Fred's words about the soil knowing how to heal, I immediately thought, like, Elgin has been on my mind so much. Like, that just blew my mind when you told me that. And Fred, just that connection to the soil and the land and healing, thinking about what Lawrence does with the colors in the struggle series and the way, I think y'all have all heard, at least, all you who work with me have heard me talk about, one of my favorite quotes is Carl Sagan, and he says, "We're all made of star stuff." And so since I've been working with struggle series, I've been quoting and saying, I think Jacob Lawrence would say, we're all made of earth stuff, right? From the colors that he uses in these panels, but also in the way that there's so many panels, you can't tell the people separate from the land, right? One of my favorite ones, A Woman, Man's a Cannon, I have to tell people, and Anna knows this because we work with some teachers, is look for the curls, right? Look for the revolver and you'll see the person, but you have to struggle, right? To sort of even make out who are the people, who are the weapons, what's the land. And I think that's so intentional of Jacob Lawrence in what he's doing with this story of history he's telling here. So on that note, we're going to kick it over to Tess.
Wow. So Erica, you kind of read my mind. It's really actually pretty amazing. Because the theme that I wanted to touch on was figure and ground. So I'm thinking as an art historian, I really appreciate the invitation to be here today from Elsa and Erica, and I'm honored to be with 3 other thinkers about Lawrence and 3 other teachers who are engaged in this work. So what I was thinking about when I was thinking about this is how do I teach a work like this, an incredible work of art at the college level in an art history class. But when I do that at University of Maryland, and I would love to talk about what kinds of courses Lawrence fits into, but maybe that's for later on. I draw on my background as a museum educator. And in particular, I draw on an idea of deceleration, right? That we slow down and we look carefully without assumptions, and we try to actually describe visual form in front of our eyes. And so I think one of the things that's really powerful about Lawrence is he gives us such an incredible articulation of how formal ideas about picture making, ideas about painting are also ideas about history, are also ideas about the stories that we tell and the kind of inheritances we have in political and social terms. So with that as our frame, I thought I would try an experiment. Like Elgin, I'm gonna ask you to close your eyes. And in your eyes, just for a moment, picture what comes to mind when you think of Paul Revere. So if you'll open your eyes, I'm showing you here this image, right, from this story of America in pictures that Lawrence was one of the references that he's kind of examining. And I think maybe some of you could quickly let me know, and feel free to just turn on your mic. Did this picture resonate with the picture that you had in your mind? And if so, how?
I'm chuckling, Tess, because it's almost exactly what I pictured, except I'm a little bit above. So not quite bird's eye view, but I'm a little on top of the scene.
Okay. So, and what did you like? Tell me a little more. What did you see?
See and hear, right? Yeah, I was the only child who read all our books. So I hear, you know, the horse pattering and sort of see the horse sort of rushing through, and see, you know, sort of these lantern that I don't even know if he actually had, but in my picture, you know, there's a lantern that he's sort of riding through with.
So this sensory thing that's all focused on this figure, right? The figure of the horse, the lantern in the hand. Yeah, Fred, I saw you turned your mic on.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say I always heard the horse. I envisioned it being cold. You know, honestly, I focus more on the hearing the horse. Like in some strange way, I heard the horse talking. Like
Wow.
not just Paul Revere saying it, but
okay,
the horse
that's
is
a
like,
poet's.
yeah, the crazy poet thing, right? But I always felt cold, and I always felt like the pattering of the horse.
The pattern, and also I think it's important what you just said, the voices, right? So you hear the voice of the horse, you hear maybe, you know, in relationship to the voice of Paul Revere, these two actors at the center of the image. Yeah, maybe one more person, if someone else wants to weigh in, whether this image was at all similar to what you kind of pops in your head.
Yeah, it was very similar for me. And this kind of the sense of urgency was what I was feeling, like I was imagining just like something quick with him on the horse. And I feel like this image shows that. But I also had in my mind more like contemporary, like what Boston looks like now. And this, you know, like with like the dirt road, it looks like, you know, because the only thing I can imagine of Boston is, you know, today, what I've seen. So it's interesting though, this like obviously puts it in what it probably was more accurate look like in the area.
Okay, yeah, so you've drawn our attention to just what I want to say about this image, which is in some ways that it really is an image that has this central heroic figure, right? And for all of us, there is that moment when you're kind of picturing Paul Revere, the sensation of the horse, the sensation of being on the horse. And then I'm sorry, is your name Hillary? Who just spoke? Yeah, so this sense of like, well, where is this scene taking place, right? So we have a kind of figure ground relationship here that's entirely stable. We have a really solid figure at the center, and then we have a really solid, clear sense of background. So now I want to just move on to look at Lawrence's panel. Oh no, why is it doing that? Sorry. I'm not sure why here we go. Okay, so now as we look at this panel together, I want to think about this question again of figure and ground. So this question of what constitutes the figure here and what constitutes the ground. And just take a moment to look at moments where that is stable, but also moments where that might be unstable, where your eye isn't sure what is the figure and what is the ground. And maybe a few people could share kind of where your eye goes.
I mean, I'm looking at just to the left and below the horse's chin, the three pointy objects.
Those bright white triangles.
I'm not sure what's going on there.
Yes.
And yeah, so I'm not, I just don't know exactly what's happening there.
Right. Is there a black form in front of some bright white light, perhaps? It's unclear what's happening. And the spatial relationship, what is the figure and what is the ground in this area is almost entirely ambiguous. Yes. Did anyone else have another area here that drew your eye to a question of figure and ground?
It's interesting to me. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Yes, it's interesting to me how I didn't see the central figure, in a sense, is the horse and Revere, and I didn't see it at first. All I could see was the group, so.
So that's a great description. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
So what's supposedly the central figure and what it's, what it's about, so to speak.
So you said I couldn't even see the central figure. All I could see was the group, right?
Right.
That's a really interesting formal thing that's happening in this panel, where we have this sense of a group of people, and it is difficult to pick out the body of Paul Revere here. In fact, there's this kind of void in the center, this giant, swath of black paint that is cut up into all of these different facets, some of which are the horse, some of which are his cloak, some of which seems to just evoke the space between them, right? And all of which recedes from sight, right? Becomes a kind of confusion of figure and ground. Yeah. Does anyone want to so we've thought about the central figure, this very ambiguous passage here. Anyone want to point out another place, if there was one that your eye went to where there was a kind of instability of figure and ground?
So in the chat, Tess, Alyssa said Revere's face and the figure behind him are sort of indistinguishable between hair and mouth, sort of don't know which is which.
Yeah, so these questions of the face, right? This figure's hair and this figure's mouth, right? There's a play back and forth there where that brown form is both the negative space of the mouth and the positive space of that person's head. And it kind of comes in and out. And I think there's an incredible way in this panel, right, that there's a play of shadows here, these dark brown forms that seem to kind of echo the figures, seem to give kind of material density to the ground underneath them. But also that's negative space, right? That's background at the same time. So I just want to, we could talk about this for an hour, but in my 7 minutes, I'm really thinking about how an idea like that, the instability of figure and ground, can be an idea that's a formal idea, that's a visual idea, that's something that marks Lawrence as a modernist painter, right? This is what modernist painters are all about. They're really interested in questions of figure and ground and the instability of those things. And at the same time, that can be a question about American history, right? That can be a question about how we theorize the telling of history. Who are the agents? Who are the figures? What is the ground? And some of the kind of ways that I might think about that in other panels and make that a little bit more specific, I'll just go through a couple that I thought about with this panel. So this pairing, right, panel 1, which is an incredible panel, and there's some really wonderful interpretive information about it in the catalog, but I'm really interested in this red that just surges up. It is background that refuses to be negative space, that refuses to be background, right? So the way in which the ground here is the kind of context in which an assertion gets made about freedom, right? Or about truth, the ground actually surges up and meets the figure. And that those kinds of moments are happening throughout that could be an idea about history, right? That could be an idea about the way that a single person's actions are embedded in context, embedded in relationships, right? The idea that a revolution or an act of truth-telling is a collective act. Those kinds of things can be expressed through formal ideas around this instability of figure and ground. Another panel that's playing with these things is definitely this panel, Trappers. I really appreciate Fred's poem about it. But we have this form on the left, this black form that is, it's a tree trunk, right? It's the carcass of an animal, and it is also just a black void here. And to me, that ambiguity, right? These kind of moments of illegibility, of voids, speaks to something about how things remain unseen in our historical narratives, right? There are things that are never going to be recovered, voices that did not get included in the archive, right? And this is where a lot of our theories about the making of history and its relationship to power, scholars like Saidiya Hartman, scholars like Michelle Roth-Trouillot, right, are thinking about questions like that. And so this is where part of my argument about Lawrence for my students is that he's theorizing history, right? The telling of history, and some of which must always remain illegible to us, right? Some of which cannot be fully recuperated. And then the last point would be, like Fred, I'm ending with the ground, right? The ground here, my figure ground concept really becoming quite literal, and how much in the struggle series, Lawrence is interested in the ground, like in the earth itself, like what happens at the level of nature, of the resources, the ownership, the communities, ground as witness, right? That actual, that the earth itself, ground in this series, is a kind of agent. And in this panel, the way that it kind of encircles the whole composition, right? It surges over the top here, like an encircling arm, is a really beautiful evocation of that idea. So those are some of the ways that I would try to get my students to think about how form and meaning come together, and specifically for Lawrence, how form is also embedded in an idea about theorizing history, right? Theorizing how we tell historical narratives. So thank you.
Thank you, Tess. These are all so great. Thank all of you. I know I was a little, I called and talked to you all. I was like, I got a little homework for you to do with this. And I think you all just knocked it out of the park. And then the thing that I hope would happen, happened. And I think it speaks so much to Lawrence and not necessarily to us, right? But sort of these overlaps, right? And these connections that literally were through all of you all's work. And funny, we just did that randomly in alphabetical order, and sort of it just set up nicely anyway. And so I want to pose a question to you all sort of with that in mind, and just thinking about Jacob Lawrence, just generally, right? We've talked a lot about struggle specifically, but like, what makes Jacob Lawrence so great to bring into the classroom? And I think you guys have mentioned a few things here, but even outside of struggle series, just what is it about him, his artwork, his life that makes him so prime for teaching with, using as a teaching tool?
He's a nonfiction painter. So yeah, that's right up my alley as a history teacher.
I mean, I guess I would say that because there's so much in it, right? Like, because he is, I mean, obviously all the painting and the skill and the virtuosity that comes along with painting that's all there. But then the engagement with the ideas and the history, and I like what you said, Tess, about form, because again, I go back to the rendering of the text on the pages, that to render the text that way, to deploy them it says something that he's thinking about form, right? And when you assemble a text that way, when you line break, when you enjam, when you have ellipses, when you have all these other things, these things are intentional that may be suggestions for us to ask questions, right? And a dash, an M dash is for us to put stuff in it, right? What's in the gap? What can we fill that M dash with, right? Like when we live and we die, for me it'll say 1975 and whatever, but all my life is in that dash. And so when you see that in the text, when you see an M dash in the text, or there's something intentional there, and that's what I'm saying. His expansiveness and his scope, I think, is really interesting, and that's what makes. There's a lot of ways you can go in teaching the work,
and just that intermediality. I mean, you can teach about language, found language, right, that comes from primary sources, but you can teach, I mean, the visual virtuosity is so precise and considered, even though it has this kind of seeming simplicity. It really bears a kind of close engagement and sustained engagement that is like that's what you want when you ask students to, I mean, because half of what you're doing with students is you're promising them it's worth their time, right? This is going to be worth your time to slow down and look at this with me. And with Lawrence, like you can trust, like it's going to be worth your time. There's a lot to see, like the meanings of what you will find if you undertake that kind of looking are so rich. And I have to say, that's not always the case with everything we have to look at in the art history classroom. So that's part of what I love about teaching Lawrence.
Erica, do you know if Lawrence painted this series as he did the migration series where he went color by color?
He did not, from what I know, and Beth, jump in if I'm saying something wrong, but he did paint them sort of in the years, right? So he does a bunch in 54, a bunch in 55, and a bunch in 56. And there's a great essay in there by Beth, actually, that talks about sort of the similarities between the ones that he does in those time periods that I think is very interesting and very Lawrence. Sort of in that very, I talk a lot about intention with Lawrence, right? He's so intentional with every piece of this, even, as simple as the migration series looks, right? He's super intentional in that as well. So not one color at a time, like he did with migration, but he did do them in these sort of, in these years and these chunks. So he didn't do them chronologically. Elgin, I think you were going to jump in here too.
Sure. I was just going to add that I taught a design studio where we read Isabel Wilkerson's Warmth of Other Suns and looked at the migration series at the same time. And it was a really powerful exchange, 13 diverse students from all over the world. And so everyone found themselves within the series. And we found that students were actually placing their projects that they were designing. And the idea was responding by almost doing an exhibition in the Vanderbilt Hall at Grand Central Terminal, this idea of a symbolic way of migrating. And so students were finding which panel they related to in their projects. It was a really beautiful way of understanding space, filling in the blanks in the story, but it also really put a beautiful context to the Wilkerson reading. It was just a really nice interplay between both.
Cosby, you want to jump in and say anything about Wilkerson?
Well, no, Elgin and I do the same thing. I teach in a class for an after-school class for kids from different high schools, and we read The Warmth of Other Suns, and we go to the Phillips collection every fall to look at the panels. We look at the whole migration series at the MoMA website, and we also, and then the students do oral history projects with Black migrants who were part of, who had come to Washington before 1970. And I just can't say enough about The Warmth of Other Suns. So Elgin, yet I'm right there with you.
And Anna's dropping some great links in the chat. We did a great project with Cosby students last year and sort of actually turning those oral histories into a documentary film that we did in the middle of a pandemic because we love making our lives difficult. No, it was awesome. Our interviews were awesome. The speakers were awesome. And we definitely incorporated that poem, The Warmth of Other Suns, into it as well. So please check that out. So I definitely want to leave time. I have like a long list of questions, and we all individually talked about so much that I'm not going to get a chance to talk about today. But I do want to throw a question out there that I've been sort of giving to everyone that I've talked to about the struggle series. So a little history. So in December of 54, Jacob Lawrence writes in his grant application to the Chapel Foundation, and he's proposing to tell a series about the story of America, is how he describes it. And so he researches for 5 years at the Schomburg Library. We talk about those, where you get those quotes and everything, literal heavy research for 5 years. And along the way, he says his goal changed from telling the history of the Negro people of the United States to a history of all people who immigrated to the New World and contributed to the creation of the United States, right? Idyllic, like, yes, we want to tell this story, right? But as we know, or as some of you may not know, first of all, Lawrence could barely get a grant to make the struggle series, right? So that Chapel Brook Foundation was hard won. And then after he completed the struggle series, he had significant difficulty finding either an institutional buyer for that, or even sort of, Lawrence liked to keep his series together, or finding a buyer who's willing to sort of get the meat of the struggle series. And so two kind of questions. And one, I think, maybe I'm hinting to already. One, why? Why did no one want to buy the struggle series in the 50s, right? In 56, you're sort of, why don't we want to tell this inclusive view of history that Lawrence is trying to tell? He's also super famous at this point. Like, why wouldn't we want to own even just the Jacob Lawrence work, even if we didn't understand what he was telling? And then secondly, what of the thirst for the struggle series today, right? I couldn't come up with a better word than thirst, but I think we're all excited about it, and we're talking about teaching with it. Sort of what's changed or hasn't changed? Why do we care now about this story that Lawrence is telling? And why didn't we care? Or maybe there's a different word for care. What was different in 56 when he was sort of shopping this and trying to get people interested? So I know there's a lot, but somebody jump in for me.
I think the thing that spoke to me, and I think I'm looking for that page in this catalog, is that big picture of McCarthy talking to his, so it's like, if he started this in the fifth, so McCarthy era is 40s, 50, I think like 53 is when the House Un-American committee started its trials. They had Langston Hughes up. Langston Hughes, if you can find the text of the questions they asked Langston Hughes and his responses to them. But I think it was that. I think that was part of it, is that who at the time, who was going to buy a series that was calling into question America at a time that we were treating its citizens like this? I mean, and that's on top of Emmett Till in 55. That's on top of like everything else that was happening, right? Like, so, I think that, and I think we're in a similar moment now. It's just that the information, we've got so much more information at our disposal. I live in North Carolina. And so, the lieutenant governor here is making these trying to make these crazy policies about critical race theory, right? Not because of critical race theory, but because it's about the questioning of the narrative of what America is, right? Is what I think. I mean, we don't have to go off into critical race theory, but what I'm saying is like the fundamental piece is not whatever ideological movement was happening at the time. It's the questioning of the narrative of what America is, and I think that was the piece that Lawrence was grappling with. It's like, ooh, I don't know if you can question America like that right now. What is that going to mean? What is it going to mean if I invest in this work and people find out? Like when we look at the provenance, when people look at the provenance of the piece and say, oh, you own a piece by this communist? Really? Right? Like, so it's all of that, I think.
Thanks, Fred. Anybody else want? And then why do we care today? What is it about? Is it something about this moment where we are? Elgin, I'm actually going to put you on the spot here, because I think you being in Charlottesville, I think, a lot of this is probably resonating for you. But why do we care now?
Sure. I think right now we're really trying to understand who we are and how we got here. And you know, and I live in a city where all of our systems are being rethought, from how we have spaces, how we set spaces, how we define ourselves. But it's something that I always think about. I mean, I'm talking to you all from a former plantation, as Erica mentioned before. Monticello is right over there, and I teach at a school where Thomas Jefferson picked the faculty. So you also are living this rethinking. And I think students right now, more than ever, are wanting to rethink and understand those systems, how we got here, and also to really rethink where to go. And I think falling into these images from Lawrence, really getting empathic and connecting with each other, have the answers for us. Plus, I think what's really in there is this idea of Black creativity as a way to lead us forward. You know, Black creativity, when it really comes down to it, is this response that happens through adversity. And once you're coming in adversity, you find joy and peace that comes from your soul that connects with others. That happens every time you look at a Lawrence piece. It happens when you hear a fantastic song, a beautiful speech, a gorgeous poem. But perhaps that's what our spaces of education can do. We can create these moments together, and it'll help us resolve how we got here.
Thank you, Elgin. And Tess and Cosby, did y'all want to add anything on that point? Either the why not then and the why now?
I'll just say quickly that I think when he's doing these paintings, we're coming out of Korea. We're 8 to 10 years out of World War II. And there's a lot of blood and guts in the struggle series. And I think America was like not trying to have blood and guts anymore. They were tired of seeing that stuff. But I do think that Fred's point about questioning the narrative is the more important issue. But I do think that there was some exhaustion, some war and battle fatigue that the country was going through. And so seeing more guns and more bayonets and more blood was just not the thing that they were trying. They were trying to turn on their TVs and drive their cars and see some fresh cakes coming out of the oven.
I mean, I'll weigh in here just thinking about the art history moment as well, which is that I think we have a group of Black artists in the middle of the century who are really experimenting with universalism in ways that, like, I'm thinking about Charles White as well, who's also kind of experimenting with this question of like, can the Black image be universal? Like, what would that transform about the narratives we tell? And I feel like this is kind of, you know, making points of contact with Fred's point and Elgin's as well. And I think there was not, I mean, as we know, what, you know, the white power structure around the purchasing of art and the exhibition of art and the had, you know, was in full force, certainly in mid-century. So I think, you know, those are stories that we're still just now asking ourselves about, a kind of distortion of, you know, what was the American art of the 50s, right? that mattered. And there was a loud voice about what it was. And it was not, you know, it was not historical narrative painting. It was an idea that painting needed to be remade almost without history, right? So I think that that's a really interesting tension, right? Lawrence, to be making these paintings like at the moment that Jackson Pollock is coming on the scene, and they're saying, you know, painting has to start from scratch. And Lawrence is saying, like, the only way forward is to have this empathic reckoning with history. It's just, and I think in that way, it is maybe more in tune with certainly some communities in our current moment that are asking more of those questions, that the only way to go forward is to have a deeper and more humanistic reckoning with history in this country.
Thank you, Tess. I think it was a beautiful note to sort of, I mean, I have a ton more questions that I don't have time to get to, but just as sort of mentioned, I think Elgin probably nods to this too, that mention of empathy, right? And sort of using Lawrence and using his teaching, you know, sort of as a tool for teaching of social justice, but also just empathy, right? I talk a lot about perspective in these tours I've been doing on the struggle series, right? And sort of in Washington crossing the Delaware, there is no Washington, but we do see all the people who are rowing. We do see the way those waves are crashing up against their boat, and sort of we can feel what they're feeling, right? We can feel the cold in that moment. And there's no, great white man in the middle holding up a flag that doesn't exist yet, right? You're sort of in that retelling that is our common image of Washington crossing the Delaware, right? Jacob Lawrence puts our eyes on the women, on the Native people, right? On the regular people who help create this story, right? Who are still, right? We're still working to create, as Lawrence says, a perfect nation. So because I've talked so much, we only have a few minutes, and maybe if you all are down to just hang out, maybe 5 extra minutes for us, we love to open up the floor for questions from you all, or any comments or anything that you'd like to share. Feel free to turn on your cameras if you want, and just unmute yourselves, or you can use the chat if you're more comfortable than that. Beth, if you'd like to say anything, we'd love to just hear from you. Thanks for being here today. And Harvey, I had a question for you too, but I don't want to put you on the spot. So if anyone is willing to, if you have any questions or you want to share anything, please do. Don't be shy.
I'm happy to hear a question and maybe I can answer it.
Absolutely, Harvey. You own 15 of the panels from the struggle series. And I just, the question my mom hated to get from me all the time when I was growing up is just the why. I love to know about what drew you to the struggle series, and sort of, I would venture the guess that finding 15 of these panels that were spread all over the place was not an easy mission. And I think Beth can probably speak to that too, in sort of trying to bring this exhibition together. So the why, I guess is really my question for both you, Harvey, and Beth, who's devoted so much time to sort of telling this story and bringing these panels back together. Why Lawrence? Why now? Why this?
Well, it started more than 25 years ago when my wife and I first got an introduction to the series after we went to MoMA to see the reunion of the migration series there in January of 1995. But it preceded that because my mom's first cousin was William Gropper, who was a leading radical artist of the 1930s and 40s. He was on the staff of the New Masses, their chief cartoonist, the Liberator. He was a close friend of Claude McKay's. A very famous incident where the two of them were in a theater in New York, and Claude McKay was asked to go to the balcony. They didn't want him to sit in the front with Gropper. The two of them went up to the balcony together and then left, and it was the basis for one of Claude McKay's very famous poems. So the idea of Gropper being my mother's first cousin, and the search I had to learn more about Gropper and what he represented, eventually led to his friend Jacob Lawrence, and the collection that my wife and I put together starting 25 or more years ago. It was just a natural fit when we first came across the struggle series paintings at the Midtown Payson Gallery in January of 1995 to try to get one or two for the collection. And eventually over time, it led to this. We had no idea or intention when we got the first panels, which spoke to us on themes of the struggle for civil rights and civil liberties, the dignity of labor, immigrant experience in America, et cetera, which was all about what Gropper was about, that eventually would lead to the reunion many years later. But there's a common core, both from the family tradition, my own feelings about what is important, and the way Lawrence and Gropper came together both as friends and as true spirits. Gropper did appear before Joseph McCarthy in May of 1953, around the time when Langston Hughes and Aptica and many others appeared. He was a very close friend of Langston Hughes. Have some wonderful letters that Langston Hughes wrote about Gropper at the time of an important testimonial for Gropper. He was into the movement in the 30s when it was long before what we're talking about today, or even 25 years ago when I first got involved with this. So that's the basic background as to how this came together.
Thank you, Harvey.
Right.
Beth, can we hear a little bit from you?
Well, first of all, I just want to tell you how happy I am to have listened to this marvelous group of teachers and all of these wonderful lesson plans. I feel like it's just exhilarated me and stimulated me with new ideas. And so I want to thank you all for being such great teachers, and I'm happy to be your student. And so Lawrence himself was a great teacher. And in fact, I think, he began teaching in 1955. And so think about that. This long course of teaching, his panels were meant to teach and meant to share and meant to communicate. He was such a great communicator, very effective. And by that, I mean, not just the idea that he found a very clear and simple way to paint, because we know that from listening to all of you, that it's a very complex and very layered enterprise. But thinking about how looking and thinking and reading and synthesizing opens the mind and opens the heart. And that's where we come back around to empathy, really to connect and to try to understand the connection between all of us. And that's certainly something I've felt resonated today in all the lessons, and resonated with my own experience knowing Jacob Lawrence and having worked with him for 10 years, the last decade of his life. So it's just been a thrill. And of course, Harvey, it's been a great journey, and there's more to do. That's the great exciting thing, is that a great teacher opens the door and invites that growth, that multiplication.
Thank you, Beth. And thank you all. So we are just a little over time, and I want to end. We've been talking about this catalog so much, so I highly recommend you go pick it up. It has some amazing essays. And I just want to sort of wrap up the evening with a quote by Stephen Locke that's been on my mind since I've read it, and everyone who works with me have probably heard it a lot too. But I sort of want to end on this note and something for us all to ponder from Stephen Locke. And Stephen says, "What if struggle is not something to overcome or something to survive? What if the state of things is struggle? What if struggle is how we are to be in the world? Struggle as a place, a location, a setting. Struggle as a happening, a condition. Struggle as a state of being, unending, unresolvable, continuing, and constant." So with that, I bid you all a wonderful rest of your Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. Thank you, Harvey and Beth, for being here. Thank you, DK. Thank you, everyone. This is amazing. If you need, have any questions about how to adapt this for your kindergartners, reach out to us in the education department. We can talk to you, or we'll just punt you to Tess or Elgin or Fred or Cosby, and they can tell you. Hope you all have learned a lot and enjoyed yourselves today. And thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.